In reflecting on the personal lives behind the slapstick brilliance of the Three Stooges, one theme stands out: seriousness. Contrary to the chaos on screen, their home lives had a thoughtful, even solemn tone, particularly when it came to writing and preparation. This seriousness took on a haunting depth in the final week of Moe Howard's life. As the last surviving Stooge, Moe finally opened up about something fans had wondered for decades: what really happened to his brother, Curly. The truth, when it came, was nothing short of heartbreaking. For years, audiences speculated why Curly Howard, the most beloved of the trio, vanished from the spotlight at the peak of his fame. Rumors had swirled, but no solid answers ever surfaced, until Moe broke his silence. What he revealed wasn't just a farewell to his brother, it was a confession. A dark, emotional revelation that forced even the most devoted fans to see the Stooges in a new light. It changed everything people thought they knew about Curly, Moe, and the golden age of their comedy. The Three Stooges were more than just a vaudeville act turned film sensation. They were a cultural force, known for their outlandish gags and timeless slapstick. At the heart of it all were three distinctly different personalities: Moe Howard, the firm-handed leader with a bowl haircut and a quick slap; Larry Fine, the frizzy-haired, hapless middleman; and Curly Howard, born Jerome Lester Horwitz, the electric wildcard who stole the show. Curly wasn't originally intended to be part of the act. When Moe's older brother Shemp Howard left the trio in 1932, Moe and Larry were left searching for a replacement. Curly, Moe's younger brother, wasn't the obvious choice. He had no acting experience, a soft-spoken demeanor, and a baby-faced innocence that didn't scream comedy star. But Curly was desperate for the role. He shaved his thick hair and mustache to create a more comical appearance, and it worked. From his very first performance, something magical happened. Curly quickly became the centerpiece of the Stooges. Moe would later admit that his younger brother was a natural. Most of Curly's iconic moves, the barking, the spinning, and his famous nyack nyack nyack, weren't scripted. They came straight from instinct. Directors quickly learned to simply let the cameras roll and let Curly do his thing. His unpredictability brought an infectious energy to every scene. Yet, behind the scenes, Curly was far from the loud, wild persona he played. Moe saw the real man, a gentle, quiet, deeply insecure soul. Off-camera, Curly avoided attention. Fame made him anxious. He found interviews exhausting and public appearances unbearable. He gave freely to fans and colleagues, yet he rarely let anyone truly know him. He struggled with intimacy, bouncing from one short-lived marriage to another, often retreating into solitude. As their fame grew, so did the pressure. The relentless production schedule was grueling. The physical demands, slaps, falls, stunts, were relentless. Curly never complained, but Moe began to notice changes. Curly started missing cues, forgetting lines. Something was slipping. And for Moe, it wasn't just professional concern, it was watching a beloved brother unravel under the weight of a world he never truly fit into. Curly had once been the heartbeat of the act, quick on his feet, instinctively hilarious, and effortlessly improvisational. But something began to shift. His signature fast reactions grew sluggish, and his weight began to fluctuate noticeably. At first, many chalked it up to stress from the relentless pace of filming. But Moe saw deeper. He noticed a change in Curly's eyes, a dimming of that spark that once lit up every stage. Even when audiences howled with laughter, there were quiet, troubling moments. Sometimes Curly would walk off set, not in anger or frustration, but in confusion, as if he'd forgotten where he was supposed to be. In later interviews, Moe admitted this was when he began to understand that Curly wasn't just exhausted, something was truly wrong. Still, the show couldn't stop. The Three Stooges had contracts to fulfill and a hungry audience to entertain. Moe tried his best to shield his brother from the growing strain without exposing the decline. Looking back, he spoke of those years with quiet regret. He gave everything he had on camera, Moe once said, and had nothing left for himself. Even as the world laughed, the man behind the slapstick was silently unraveling. Moe saw the warning signs. Most people didn't. But he never forgot the way laughter masked the pain. By the early 1940s, the Three Stooges had reached the height of their fame. They were a household name, beloved across America. But behind the scenes, Curly was deteriorating. Though only in his late 30s, he moved like someone twice his age. He had developed high blood pressure and his weight ballooned rapidly. His once razor-sharp timing began to falter. What started as minor lapses, forgetting a line, needing an extra take, soon became undeniable. By 1942, Moe and the crew could no longer ignore the cracks. Moe later described how Curly, during breaks between takes, would sit silently in his chair, drenched in sweat and visibly drained. He had always been quiet off camera, but now there was a vacant, distant look in his eyes. It wasn't just tiredness. Something more serious was at play. His body was betraying him. His speech started to slur, his movement slowed, and in many scenes, crew members had to carefully position him just to keep him upright. His physical comedy, the foundation of his stardom, was becoming harder and harder to pull off. Still, Curly never once complained. Moe said his brother felt an immense responsibility to the fans, the studio, and especially to Moe and Larry. But privately, Moe knew. This wasn't just burnout. Years later, he would reveal that Curly had begun showing signs of what doctors would later identify as a series of small strokes. His hands shook. His mouth would suddenly twist mid-sentence. And yet, despite all of this, the studio pressed forward. Columbia Pictures was under pressure to churn out entertainment. With the war raging, audiences desperately needed laughs, and the Stooges delivered. Even when Curly's health was visibly failing, production didn't stop. There were contracts, deadlines, profits. And Curly, out of loyalty and pride, kept showing up. He would go on to appear in over 90 comedy shorts, pushing his body and mind to their limits, all for the sake of the act and the people who loved him, even as the cost grew heartbreakingly clear. During his final years with the Stooges, most of Curly Howard's performances were filmed while his health was already in sharp decline. The period between 1944 and 1946 was especially grueling. His energy had waned, and the once effortless brilliance that made him a standout began to fade. Still, many fans didn't notice. The camera cleverly masked his deterioration, hiding the fatigue behind close-ups and quick edits. But Moe noticed everything. As both his brother and co-star, he carried the emotional weight of watching Curly struggle, physically and mentally, while still keeping the show afloat. In his later reflections, Moe spoke openly about that guilt. Curly, he said, gave the last fragments of himself to those final performances, not because he wanted to, but because he felt obligated. He felt he owed it to the fans, to the act, and to Moe and Larry. To the audience, it was still comedy, still laughter. But behind the scenes, for those who knew the truth, every spin, slap, and pratfall felt like a quiet tragedy. Curly was dying in silence, bit by bit, while the world laughed, unaware. By 1946, Curly's health had reached a breaking point. The signs had been there for years: slurred speech, trembling hands, growing confusion, but no one anticipated how quickly the end would come. On May 6, 1946, during the filming of Half-Wit's Holiday, the unthinkable happened. Curly collapsed on set from a massive stroke. He was just 42 years old. Moe Howard was there that day and would later recall that the real death of Curly wasn't physical, it was spiritual. The man the world adored, the one who could make people laugh with just a glance or a spin, had vanished in an instant. The stroke left Curly partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly. His coordination was destroyed, and emotionally he became unstable. It was a cruel twist of fate for someone whose entire career had been built on physical comedy. He could barely walk, much less perform. Just like that, his time with the Stooges, and the career that defined him, was over. The loss devastated Moe. Not just because he had lost the heart of the act, but because he had lost his little brother in every meaningful way. The Three Stooges had no time to mourn. The studio pressed forward. To keep the act alive, they brought back Shemp Howard, Moe and Curly's older brother, who had originally left the trio in 1932, which had allowed Curly to step in. Now, Shemp was returning to replace him. But as Moe later admitted, things were never the same. Shemp's style was different, more verbal, more awkwardly nervous. He was funny in his own right, but he wasn't Curly. The chemistry had shifted, and audiences felt the difference. The soul of the Stooges, the wild, unpredictable, larger-than-life energy that Curly brought, was gone. Meanwhile, Curly's condition only worsened. After that first stroke, more followed in the coming years. He was transferred from hospitals to long-term care facilities, with some reports suggesting time in mental institutions as his emotional state became increasingly fragile. He experienced memory loss, confusion, and fits of distress. His vibrant spirit was fading, piece by piece. By 1949, there was a brief and bittersweet glimmer of hope. Curly made a cameo appearance in the Stooges' short film Malice in the Palace. For fans, it was one of the last chances to see the man who had once been the heart of the act. But even in that fleeting moment, it was painfully clear Curly was no longer the same. The light that once captivated millions had dimmed beyond recognition. That brief cameo in Malice in the Palace said it all. Curly wasn't Curly anymore. The man who had once redefined physical comedy, whose wild energy had lit up every screen, was now living a quiet and tragic life far removed from the spotlight. His body had broken down, and his mind was following. Moe continued to lead the Stooges, delivering laughs with every slapstick routine, every poke and pratfall, but behind the comedy was a sorrow he carried in silence. It wasn't until the final years of his own life that Moe finally opened up about what had truly happened to Curly. In those moments, he spoke not only of heartbreak but of guilt, about the signs they all saw, the warnings they ignored, and the painful reality that Curly's fall wasn't just a tragedy, it was a slow, avoidable collapse that none of them dared to confront in time. Once Curly Howard left the Stooges following his massive stroke in 1946, most fans assumed he was resting and recovering in private. But the truth was far more devastating. Out of the public eye, the man who had once brought joy to millions was quietly unraveling. The stroke had left him physically weakened, but it had also stolen crucial parts of his mind. Moe later shared that in the months after the stroke, Curly refused to accept that his time with the Stooges was truly over. He would often cry and ask Moe when he could return to work, still believing he'd recover and reclaim his place. He didn't believe it was over, Moe said. He thought he'd get better and rejoin us. But we all knew he wouldn't. As time passed, Curly's emotional and psychological state worsened. He became increasingly paranoid, often distrustful of those closest to him. His weight ballooned as he sank deeper into depression, no longer caring for himself or finding motivation to try. This was no longer the Curly fans remembered, the wild, unpredictable comedian with boundless charm. This was a man trapped inside a broken body and a fading mind. Moe continued to visit, standing by his brother not just as a former co-star, but as family. Yet even he admitted that there were times he barely recognized the man lying in the hospital bed. Each time, Moe said, it felt like looking at a stranger with my brother's eyes. Curly's personal life had also spiraled. He had been married 4 times, and while each failed relationship had its own story, Moe hinted that Curly's mental instability and unpredictable behavior were often the root cause. His moods could swing from gentle sweetness to sudden confusion or angry outbursts. Eventually, the situation became so dire that Curly had to be institutionalized. Doctors determined he needed long-term care, not just for his failing body, but for his deteriorating mental health. The medication available in the 1940s and early 1950s offered little help. His days became filled with sterile hospital routines rather than laughter or rehearsals. Throughout it all, Curly's fans were kept in the dark. The world that once adored him never truly saw the suffering behind the curtain. Moe and Larry tried to visit, tried to help, but they were comedians, not doctors or therapists. We didn't know how to help him, Moe would later confess. They were ill-equipped to deal with such a painful decline, and their own careers demanded they keep moving forward. And so, as the spotlight turned to new faces and fresher routines, Curly slipped quietly into the shadows, his greatness remembered, but his suffering largely unseen. To keep the show alive, even as one of their brightest stars faded into obscurity, the Three Stooges pressed on. By the early 1950s, Curly had suffered multiple additional strokes. Each one chipped away at his abilities, his speech deteriorated, and he became increasingly confused and emotionally fragile. The man who once defined physical comedy could no longer walk without help. His once boundless energy was reduced to fleeting moments of awareness, scattered between hospital stays and periods of cognitive decline. For Moe, it felt like a slow-motion grief, mourning his brother while he was still breathing. Yet, somehow, Curly never stopped smiling when Moe came to visit. Even in the wreckage of his mind and body, there remained a faint spark of the man who once lived to make people laugh. But it was flickering, fading, and by January 1952, that light finally went out. Publicly, though, the image of the Stooges remained untouched. As the 1940s gave way to the 1950s, their films continued to draw laughter and admiration. Fans flooded the studio with letters, "When is Curly coming back? Why isn't Curly in the new films?" The truth was heartbreaking, but it was not shared. The studio had a brand to protect. The Three Stooges were a comedy powerhouse, and there was no room in that image for sickness or tragedy. Moe, always the steady figure of the group, became the unofficial spokesperson. When asked, he would smile and respond with gentle deflections, "Oh, Curly's just resting," or he needed a little time off. These weren't just lies, they were protective shields, told with love to preserve Curly's dignity. But when the lights went down and no one was watching, Moe would quietly cry. "I had to smile for the cameras and pretend everything was fine," he once said, "but I was watching my brother die in slow motion." Moe carried an immense burden, not only as the leader of the Stooges, responsible for keeping the act running and jobs secure, but also as a grieving brother enduring an invisible loss. He admitted, years later, that the guilt of hiding Curly's reality haunted him. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he felt torn between preserving his brother's legacy and exposing the heartbreaking truth. In the end, he chose silence. Even after Curly's death in January 1952, Moe didn't speak publicly about what had happened. He let the world remember Curly as the energetic, hilarious clown who brought endless joy. There were no tell-all interviews, no press releases about his brother's suffering. But time has a way of changing perspective. As Moe entered the final chapter of his own life in the early 1970s, his health began to fail, and so did his resolve to stay silent. He realized that the world had never really known Curly, they had only known the character. Fans laughed at reruns, oblivious to the pain behind the slapstick. And as his own end drew near, Moe no longer wanted Curly's legacy to be defined solely by the laughs, the barking, or the iconic "Nyack Nyack Nyack." He wanted people to understand the man behind the act, the brother he loved, the artist who suffered, and the life that was lost too soon behind the curtain of comedy. Moe Howard's decision to finally speak out wasn't for fame or sympathy, it was for peace. He wanted people to see beyond the wild antics and funny noises. He feared that Curly, his beloved brother, would be remembered only as a clown. But Curly was more than that. He was a kind, generous soul who suffered deeply behind the scenes. In Moe's final days, he began to reveal the truth he had carried for decades, truths that would upend everything fans thought they knew about the Three Stooges, especially about Curly. In what became his most heartbreaking and revealing admission, Moe sat for one final interview during the last week of his life. This was no nostalgic stroll through the past. It was raw, painful, more like a confession than an interview. For fans who cherished the joyful, high-energy image of Curly, what Moe shared was devastating. "I should have said something sooner," he admitted. For most of his life, Moe had shielded the public from the darker reality behind the scenes. He knew fans adored Curly for his innocence, his absurdity, and his lovable chaos. But in his last days, Moe could no longer carry the weight of the silence. Curly was not the man people saw on camera, he said, and with that single sentence, decades of illusion fell apart. Moe explained that off-screen, Curly was tormented. He struggled with loneliness, emotional fragility, and deep exhaustion. While millions laughed, Curly was quietly unraveling, lost in confusion, depression, and declining health. And all of it had been hidden. Moe had helped keep that secret, and now the guilt was unbearable. Moe revealed that the warning signs had started long before the devastating stroke in 1946. There were moments of slurred speech, overwhelming fatigue after shoots, and private emotional breakdowns. But they kept filming anyway. Why? Moe's answer was heartbreaking. The studio made it clear, either we show up or we get replaced. Columbia Pictures, the powerhouse behind the Three Stooges, ran a tight and merciless operation. There was no room for slowing down. The Stooges' short films were cheap to make, wildly profitable, and in constant demand. Moe described how the group was pushed to the brink, filming multiple shorts a month, each filled with physically punishing routines. Curly, though visibly declining, was expected to keep pace. He was having strokes, Moe said, voice cracking, and they still had him throwing pies and falling downstairs. There were bruises, injuries, and mounting emotional tolls. And through it all, Curly never stopped performing, not because he could, but because he was expected to. Moe didn't just blame the studio, he blamed himself. As the leader of the group, he had pushed Curly to keep going, believing it was the only way to protect the act, the paychecks, and the people they employed. But that decision haunted him. Watching his brother fall apart in silence left a wound that never healed. We were making people laugh, Moe said softly, while my brother was dying in front of me. For years, fans had assumed Curly quietly retired due to illness, fading into the background with grace. But Moe's confession revealed something far more painful. Curly wasn't gently let go, he was worked past his limits, ignored in his suffering, and left without the support he needed as his body and mind collapsed. In the end, Moe didn't offer excuses. He offered truth, raw and unvarnished. His final remarks weren't just a tribute to a lost brother, they were a reckoning with the choices he made, the pressure they endured, and the pain they hid. Most of all, they were spoken from a place of deep fear, the fear that Curly, a man of warmth and brilliance, would be remembered only for his funny faces and silly noises, rather than the deeply human struggles he endured behind the curtain. Most people remember Curly Howard for his goofy, lovable on-screen persona, the high-pitched antics, wild spins, and unforgettable catchphrases. But for Moe Howard, the greatest tragedy would be if that was all the world remembered. To him, reducing Curly to just a clown was a heartbreaking injustice. Behind the character was a man who struggled, suffered, and ultimately paid a steep price for the laughter he brought to others. Moe never forgot the last time he saw Curly alive. By then, the spark that had once made his brother the life and soul of the Three Stooges was gone. Curly's body was frail, his face hollow, and his eyes barely focused. He didn't speak much, if at all. It was like words didn't matter to him anymore, Moe recalled. But there was one gesture that said everything. Curly reached out and held Moe's hand tightly. He didn't say a word, but Moe believed he knew, he understood this was goodbye. That moment haunted Moe for the rest of his life. As he walked out of the hospital room, Moe broke down in tears, overwhelmed with guilt and helplessness. There was so much he wished he had said, so much he wished he had done differently. Just a few days later, on January 18, 1952, Curly passed away at the age of 48. The public reaction was one of shock and sorrow, but also confusion. Few knew how seriously ill he had been for years. The studio, and Moe himself, had worked hard to preserve the illusion that Curly had simply taken time off. His death blindsided fans who still remembered his vibrant energy and infectious joy. Letters poured in. Tributes aired across the country. But behind the scenes, Moe was dealing with something far heavier than public mourning. He was carrying a sorrow that wouldn't go away. Yet, the show had to go on. The Stooges moved forward with Shemp, then Joe Besser, and eventually Curly Joe. Moe kept leading the act, performing, smiling for the cameras, and doing interviews. But the grief stayed with him like a shadow. In public, he rarely mentioned Curly except through carefully measured words. The real story remained locked away, until Moe began confronting his own mortality. In the early 1970s, Moe was diagnosed with lung cancer. As his health declined, he began speaking more openly, especially about Curly. It wasn't just storytelling, it was a mission. Moe wanted younger entertainers to learn from their mistakes. He warned them not to sacrifice their health and well-being for applause. Hollywood, he said, could be a ruthless machine. "It will chew you up and toss you aside," he warned. He wanted people to know that Curly had been more than a funny man. He was a human being who needed help and didn't get it in time. To Moe, Curly's story wasn't just a painful memory, it was a cautionary tale. One that stayed with him until the very end. On May 4, 1975, Moe Howard passed away at the age of 77. He died surrounded by family, but even in those final moments, Curly was still on his mind. Moe was grateful that in his last interviews and writings, he had finally shared the truth, that the laughs came at a cost, and that behind every gag and pratfall was a brother in pain. Now, decades later, the truth Moe kept buried for so long has finally come to light. His silence had been born of love, but his final words were shaped by guilt and a desperate hope that what happened to Curly would never be repeated. Even in death, Moe couldn't let go of what happened. And now, the world finally understands why. What do you think about Moe's confession? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.